Well, good afternoon, friends. We're glad you've joined us here this afternoon, live on Facebook and YouTube for another episode of Face to Face with Racism. I'm Jeffrey Moore. I'm the lead pastor at St. Stephen United Methodist Church. And today our topic is educational disparities. And we have two distinguished educators with us today, Dr. LaDonna Gulley, who recently finished her EDD at Southern Methodist University. And I'll let her introduce herself, and Amy Martindale, a member of the St. Stephen community. But I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gulley to introduce yourself and offer some thoughts to get us started.
Okay, well, I want to say, first of all, Dr. Moore, because you also finished at SMU with me. So exciting.
Indeed.
And I just want to start by saying, thank you so much, and pony up, right? So, yes, my name is LaDonna Gulley. I am currently the principal at J.H. Florence Elementary in Mesquite. I have been an educator, and I cannot believe it, like now 29 years. Woo! And I absolutely love my job, and I love what we do as a collective for students. And so I think that just that level of passion and high level of commitment and dedication that we have for students, I think that just goes so far, and in the meantime, when we look at this particular question about inequities in education, I personally always like to kind of start and do a quick narrative about just the beginning. So I'm going to just kind of jump in there and just give you just a quick history lesson, because I think that it's really, really important to make known of the fact that, for 225 years, there was definitely slavery. And as a result, slaves were not, it was actually against the law to learn how to read and how to write. And so that in itself brought about the beginning of just a huge disparity. And, that also, number one, just really being a law that could not happen. Today, in our nation, we look and we see that 82% of all teachers are white. And so many people will ask, hey, well, how did that happen? Because why is it that you have educators who are not interested in color, that are not interested in the profession? And I would say it's not that you have educators that are not interested in our profession, but the truth of the matter is you have to look at it from just such a historical context first before you kind of, bring in or kind of formulate your ideas. So let's just think about this. In September 22 of 1862, our president then, Abraham Lincoln, really brought about the Proclamation Emancipation. But what did that mean? What that meant was he was basically giving Southern states that had succeeded from the Union this option to opt back into the Union, or he was going to free the slaves. And so when we think about that, we're like, oh, okay, so that is really what was going on there. That's exactly what was happening. But then when you fast forward and you look at Brown versus Board of Education, which was a landmark the Supreme Court decision that said that segregated schools were in fact unconstitutional. What that meant for millions of students that had been disenfranchised, that they were going to finally have the opportunity. But what that also meant was for teachers, for African-American teachers and other teachers of color, that, oh, okay, good, we're all going to be able to teach together. And we know that is not what happened. In fact, in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, over 50,000 African-American teachers and principals and people in upper management, they lost their jobs because there was nowhere to work. And board said, you know what, hey, fortunately, you're really good enough to teach Black children, but you're not good enough to teach white children. And so that was a huge, huge disparity. And so what has that done for students that we have here today? Of course, there are significant achievement gaps. And you cannot mistake that. But the other part of that, which is really, really huge, is when we look at discipline, just not only in, like, for instance, my little campus, but when you look at discipline from a state point of view as well as a national point of view, what you.
Well, we lost Dr. Gulley. Hopefully we'll get her back here in the stream in just a minute, because I know she was working up to a major point there. But Amy, I know you also had some thoughts about discipline. We talked about discipline. So let's slip it over to you until Dr. Gulley comes back.
Okay. So this is actually my 11th year as a kindergarten teacher. I started in Colorado Springs, and then I've spent the last 7 years in Mesquite. And I teach at Henry Elementary, which is just still in Mesquite ISD, but it's technically Dallas city limits, just south of 20. And our population is over 90% free and reduced lunch. My class alone is about 80% Hispanic, about 10% African American, and 10% white. As a school, we're majority Hispanic population. But in regards to discipline and behavior management, like Dr. Gulley was just talking about, some things that I've noticed is because the majority of teachers are white, typically the behavior management systems that you see are from a white perspective. For example, teachers kind of expecting students to sit and stay silent while they're doing a read aloud, and students who are interjecting because they're animated and they're really into the story, and so they, are calling things out, coming from, more of a storytelling background. From a white teacher perspective, that's typically seen as, oh, they're just being disruptive. They don't know how to fit into our white society. Okay,
now I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop you here because I'm being a little facetious, but how is this white? Aren't we just talking about good behavior?
According to white people, that's good behavior.
No, but it's just normal behavior, right?
That's what we like to think.
Okay, all right. For all you friends out there, I'm being facetious. This is precisely the problem, right? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be wagging my finger. I'm going to take us back to the image that Darnell St. Romain gave us at the beginning of the summer. That whiteness is like the blank piece of paper. All right, that blank piece of paper is whiteness, and the job of the black person or the person of color is to find their place on the sheet of paper. So we think of a blank piece of paper as like tabula rasa, right? There's nothing written on it. It's value neutral. But what Darnell is saying, and what I think is informative here, is that it's not value neutral. It is, in fact, our worldview, our way of moving through the world, disguised as something that's value neutral. And that's the covert part of it. So I'm sorry, Amy, I interrupted you, but
no, absolutely. And that's, I think many times white teachers don't even realize they're doing that.
Here's Dr. Gulley.
I don't know, where did y'all lose me? I'm so sorry.
You were just, that's all right. Today is the day of technical glitches and gremlins.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No. This morning's worship service was rife with them, and so this is just keeping with the day. You were just starting to talk about discipline, and Amy and I were extending that conversation while you were gone. So please, pick up where you were.
So I think I was just saying, just talking out. Did you hear all of my stats?
No, you did not gotten to the stats. I'm sorry.
I believe that. Okay, can you still hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I am so sorry. So yeah, I was just actually just talking a little bit about the fact that, you know, so many of our students, you know, when we talk about it, you know, 1.2 million students drop out of school every year. And with that, 25% of them are freshmen, you know, in high school. They stay all of 1 year, and that's basically it. You know, there are just countless of just noted disparities. I am so sorry that you guys did not get my stats because they were really, really strong. But, you know, I will go on and interject as we go. But the truth of the matter is when we're talking about students, and we're talking about discipline, and we're talking specifically about inequity in the school to prison pipeline, it no doubt starts right here in school. And it starts in elementary school where I am. And so when we talk about in our great state of Texas, we had over 1,800 students in this study done by Project Appleseed in 2016 of pre-K students being put out of class for out of school suspension, over 5,000 for that were between kindergarten and second grade, out of school suspension. And then we're talking about another 18,000 as a state.
Well, now hold on a minute. I've got to stop you here. How many out of school suspensions?
Out of school suspensions total 63,000.
Oh, okay, let me get this straight. We're sending 63,000 students home to their parents to be supervised by their parents during a workday, and the white people are out on the street protesting that we need to open up schools because they don't have any place to send their children.
No, yeah.
What?
Yeah, and this is our study. I mean, this is a study that was done by Project Appleseed in 2015, 2016. And I will tell you what they noted and what they clearly said was that we have a real systemic issue with young boys in school, and particularly our Black and our Latinx males. They are getting the short end of the stick. And as a result, when we talk about 1.2 million students dropping out of school, what can you do if you drop out of school? How are you going to make a living for your family? How are you going to be a productive citizen in society? And so those are the type of disparities that we need to really pay attention to. We need to look at these numbers and understand that behind that number is a student. Behind that student is a family. You know, and we don't know what that situation is.
And behind that student is a future family.
Absolutely.
Right? And future generations.
Absolutely.
So I want to just lift up, to put some things in perspective, to provide some different perspective, because people at St. Stephen know the story of our church's involvement in helping to desegregate Mesquite schools. I don't want to rehash that. What I do want to pull out of that story, as I understand it, if I'm wrong, someone will correct me. But in 1964, when we were still fighting to desegregate the Mesquite schools, Black and brown children were still being educated in a dirt floor, one-room schoolhouse. Now that means that people of my generation who are now parents of children in Mesquite schools were being educated on a dirt floor. Black. Okay. So this is not ancient history, right?
No.
If I was Black in Mesquite, my early days would have been formed by that experience. And that's what I carry forward. Now, I mean, I don't need to tell the two of you because you're educated educators. But LaDonna, you and I were talking about Teddy Fullenwider's story that she shared with me when she was still working in the district. And one of her principals said that she was going to take all of her underperforming teachers and put them down at the earliest grades. And Teddy said, no, 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 no. This is exactly opposite, right? Because we know we have decades of data that show if we don't this is why we have Head Start and kindergarten, folks.
Yes.
If we don't capture those early years, those are critical to brain formation, to all sorts of cognitive functioning. So now take that information and think about a person my age. If I was Black in Mesquite, my early years would have been formed in a one-room schoolhouse with a dirt floor. That's a disparity that already sets me behind, right? I mean, am I wrong here?
No, you're not at all. And I will tell you that so what's really interesting in Mesquite really actually quietly integrated their schools. And in fact, I have documentation when Florence was actually received their very first African-American students, because it's in our historical records for our PTA.
Wow.
And so it's really, really interesting. I would tell you that I think oftentimes you're exactly right, Reverend Dr. Moore, that oftentimes people will think, oh, well, this happened so long ago, but that is not the case. And I think that to really bring it up to speed and help people understand that, you know, education has been really evolving. Now, unfortunately, what we have now and what we're seeing are just high rates of like incarceration. And that's all based on policy. That's all based from, you know, the early 90s when we had the 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes, you're outlaw and you automatically ended up in prison. And that happened during the Clinton administration, you know, so now we have numerous amounts of people incarcerated. But why are they incarcerated? We know that nationally, 70% of all prisoners cannot read. That is a fact. And so we have to look and begin paying very close attention to what are we doing as educators to make sure that every single student has a chance to change their trajectory and become the best productive citizen that they can be.
One of the things that Amy and I were talking about in picking up the discipline piece was the way that discipline is framed in terms of whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
So the expectations, the whole disciplinary framework is from a white perspective.
Like I mentioned, the expectation typically from white teachers that all students are silent while we're reading, and students who are calling out, they're being disruptive, and, you know, then they get in trouble more often. Or we expect kids to, I think we as a whole, expect students to always make eye contact. Well, in some cultures, that's a sign of disrespect. But you know, us white teachers, we think you need to look me in the eye, or, you know, you're being rude. And that's not the case many times. Another one that always comes to mind with me is expecting students to always say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And that is, I went to school in New York, and the first time I called somebody ma'am, she whipped around and looked at me like, what are you calling me? That's such a Southern white thing to have that expectation across the board for all students. And if they don't do that, then they're being disrespectful. And that's not
exactly. And I will tell you, so I'm from Chicago. And so that was one of the first things when I moved here, I noticed, I was like, okay, but this is kind of different, you know, and I'm going to go with it. That's fine. But I will tell you, that has never been my expectation. The other part of that is you're exactly right. You know, typically our boys, and I'm going to tell you something, just boys, period, oftentimes are really penalized in school, you know, for moving around too much, for what we think they're not paying attention. And I will tell you, they are, you know, a great teacher. So my study was all about what do great teachers do right for all of their kids. And I looked at particularly African-American and Hispanic males. But what I saw in there over and over and over again, watching those teachers, was that they really honored every single student. And so if that student was talking out, or if that student was rolling around in the classroom, if that student was somehow wandering and had drifted away from the group, that teacher kept teaching the entire time. Like, those teachers are just amazing. And here's what's so amazing. That one of my teachers who I observed, that was a first grade teacher, she literally called out the student's name and said, okay, so what is this number? And he answered the question. Now, mind you, he's all the way on the other side of the room looking at something else. But it wasn't that he wasn't paying attention at all. And she recognized this. It's really about teachers getting to know their students and ultimately caring about them, because I don't care what a student's behavior is. If they know that you care about them, 9 times out of 10, they are going to do exactly what you want. And in fact, they're going to exceed it.
This is so critical, and I think it's an important way to understand how these things function covertly.
Mm-hmm.
So to take a very narrow example, if I look at people shouting out, Black people shouting out in church, for example, amen, hallelujah, whatever, and I say, oh, that's Black culture, right? I don't do that. That's Black culture. So it's like, okay, right? Because it's Black, it's okay for them, but it's Black culture. But then when they get in the classroom, and I, as a white teacher, when I'm reading a story, say, now you can't shout out. Well, then now this is racism, because I have framed things in terms of my own experience, and I have disallowed the other experience, even though I said it was okay for them. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is, friends, this is the covertness. This is the insidiousness. Now we have some good comments that I want to get to before our time is out. Okay. I'm going to try and put these up here, even though this is very long. But John Astle says, after Brown versus Board of Education, which, by the way, came out of Kansas.
Yes, it did, Topeka, Kansas.
It took my school district in Florida almost 17 years to address how to desegregate the schools. The solution there was cross-busing. Students in different neighborhoods would be bused across town to desegregate. Both Blacks and whites were up in arms about that. Was there a better way? From what I'm reading, some states are somehow reintroducing segregation. Is that happening in Texas, Mesquite? How does school choice play into that? Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Mm-hmm. First, I mean, I want to say, one of the covert ways I think this works is us framing it in terms of opportunity. If we say, well, everyone now has the same opportunity, mm-hmm. so it's okay. But in fact, everyone doesn't have the same opportunity. Am I wrong here?
No, you're correct. I would say, in fact, what people often don't realize is that, and I'm hearing this segregation because that's very true. You know, we are slowly but surely, unfortunately, becoming once again a very homogeneous society, meaning that we're not living together. We're choosing neighborhoods and communities that look majority like ourselves. And we're also using economics as a way to do that. So housing and economics, and your spotlight last week on housing was really, really just insightful. And so it is definitely, unfortunately, coming back, and that's how we're using our economic power to then decide how we want to educate our students. And so if I am a parent who doesn't want my child to have that experience, then I'm just going to look for an area that I know is that I can afford, and that is where I'm going to choose to buy my next home. That is where I'm going to raise my children, and I'm going to do that because I feel that that's the right thing. I think the other part of that and the other shift of that is when we talk about school choice. So the initiative of school choice was, oh, well, you know what, this is going to create opportunity. But you got to ask yourself, opportunity for who? And then you have to look, even right here in our city and in just the DFW area, when you start looking at where charter schools are, they are predominantly in minority areas within our DFW area. And so is that creating opportunity? Absolutely, it is not. And let me tell you why. Because most of the time, if I'm at a charter school, I don't have to be certified. I don't have to be, I don't have to have the proper training. I may not be able to have those things simply because my charter can't afford that. And so it's those types of disparities that continue to affect students of color.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, that's so true about the voucher program, right? This is just another a covert way for me to opt out of the system and resegregate. But even within our districts, so this is one thing, Amy, that you and I were talking about the other day. The narrative we're given, I think, is that, you know, our district is like a happy family, like, right? We're all together. And the problem is that rich district over there, right? So the narrative we're given is like Mesquite versus Highland Park. This is where we get the Robin Hood plan. I need some of Highland Park's money because we're not equal. But in fact, even our schools within the district aren't equal.
We've seen that a lot since all of the virtual learning since COVID happened. You know, the district, well, first going back to the spring, everybody was, you know, on Facebook thinking about how amazing it is that Spectrum is providing free internet. You know, everybody has the same opportunity now. We're getting free internet. Well, I had my students' parents tell me that they called Spectrum to look into that free internet, and Spectrum said, oh, sorry, we don't provide in your area. And then the district this fall has done a great job of providing devices and hotspots for all of our families who need or want them. However, again, where our school is located, just south of 20, the cell service is horrible. It's like 2G. And so even though they have hotspots provided by the district.
You meant to say 5G?
Oh, no. 2G. And so it's still not working. So they
can I get a 3G?
They still aren't able to connect, even though as a district, they're really trying to help bridge that gap. But because of where our school is located and the systems from the city and how they're set up, and then cell companies don't want to invest in that area because it's not as profitable to them, we face another set of issues.
Yeah, and it is challenging. I mean, there is no doubt. You know, the one thing I will say is that, you know, I think we have 52 schools in our district right now. And so you have 52 principals. You definitely have lots of different personalities there and range of experience, etc. And so, you know that everybody really wants to do a really good job. And our district, as Amy has stated, has done an exceptional job of making sure that we're getting the equipment and what our kids need. But at the end of the day, you would be remiss if you did not also admit the fact that, you know, here we are 77% economically disadvantaged. And that in itself presents some really unique just characteristics, and it creates us to really work even harder to make sure that we are providing equitable opportunities for every single student in our district.
Yeah, I want to be clear that I'm not bashing the district. The district is doing everything they can. The point is that there are inequities, disparities built into the system on which the whole system is built. Yes. That ripple through, that put children at disadvantage. And I'm reminded in this moment about something that my dyslexia teacher, my first degree is actually in education. And we had to take a course back then we called it dyslexia and reading difficulties or something of it. And she said, fairness is not every child getting the same thing. Fairness is every child getting what they need. Now I realize now this is not the most profound thought that she came up with by herself. But as a 19-year-old student, a white student, nonetheless, it made a huge impression on me because, of course, fairness is another one of those things that's built into the system. And so by the fairness rule, we say, well, Florence Elementary has to get the same number of hotspots as Henry Elementary, or as Shands Elementary, or as whomever elementary. It doesn't matter, you know, what the actual need is, that maybe, you know, by the grace of God, Florence Elementary does actually have 3G service, and
Yes.
uh, and so even this idea of fairness, we've got to reevaluate in order to actually get rid of disparity. So there's so much that we have talked about and so much that we still will get to. But our time is run out. And for this segment, we'll have another segment, our backstage segment, which we'll release on Tuesday. So be watching for that. But I need to bring us to a close for right now. So as we say every time, although my partner is not here to say it, these things are difficult to process, especially if you're white. And so be gentle with yourself. Be grace-filled with yourself as you wrestle with some of the things that we've talked about. But don't take your foot off the gas pedal. And in doing so, keep the conversation going. We're going to do that on Tuesday with our next segment as we dig deeper into some of these things. In the meantime, keep moving forward.